Well, it's nice to be here in chilly Cincinnati. It's a nice day for this, rainy, and that Irish music was great. It all was great, but they all practiced and I didn't, so we'll do the best we can.
I have a question.
Oh, we'll start with a question.
Because you were saying you didn't practice, I'll pose the first question.
Okay.
And I know I've talked to people.
Yep.
Could you give us an overview, just kind of tell us how it all started?
Okay. I started noticing guitars when I was about 10 years old and wondered what that sound was under the horns and all that other stuff. But by the time I was 12, which would have been 1960, guitars, that was probably the best part of my life, was listening to guitars. I wasn't old enough to own one, so my sister had a ukulele I used to strum on and learn some strumming and whatnot. And then by the time I was probably 14, I had my first guitar, which was a Gibson, and I paid $135 for that guitar. It's a classical guitar. But I really wanted a steel string, but I fooled my parents, said, I was going to study classical guitar so I could have that guitar. So that was my start, and but I wasn't a very good guitar player. But I always looked at these guitars and listened to them and fiddled with them, took them apart, fixed stuff, and kind of got involved on the other end of it. If I could play like any of these guys, I'd be playing guitar, but I couldn't. So I still play the same 3 chords that I did back in 1960. But that's good enough for me. But the rest of it fascinated me. So through high school and college, that all stayed with me, guitars. And nobody made guitars back then. They just came from companies and you saw them. And there was Guild, there was Gibson, there was Martin. And it wasn't, there wasn't a lot of good guitar. It was hard to see what a good guitar was. So, someone played one like, say, Donovan played a Guild. You go, oh, that's a good guitar. I want that guitar over there. And you never knew why it was good. Well, today is a little different because there's a lot of good guitar makers and a lot of good guitars. And what we learned, most of the people that started around the time I did, was you learn from the good guitars and what people really liked, and try to see what made that stuff work and why it was good. So it became, a lifelong obsession since 12. And I'd go in and out of motorcycles to cars to guitars to beer to racing to this or whatever. But it always, I became, known to everybody. I just dealt with guitars, And I didn't really make guitars until I was, say, 25, but I made parts of guitars and worked on guitars and became involved with them. By the time I was 25, I started to figure out what made a good guitar, and that was the early guitars from Martin, a lot of the Gibsons, a lot of the stuff. And the only reason I saw them was because they came through me for repair, or you'd hear in the network, you'd hear about it. But they weren't as popular then as they were today. Guitars were more of a utility, I think. You just go buy a guitar and you could replace it. But so for some reason, I started to make guitars, and about 25, and after the first guitar, I had orders. So that's how it started, and that's how it ended. So it never quit. Make one and sell one. Try to make the next one a little better, and worry about that, and worry about the next one, and not stop worrying. So, and hopefully make people happy who play instruments. So those little things drove me and carried me through about 40 years. So I'm 62 now, or 61, one of those two. So it's been a long 45 years, I think. Been working on them and wondering and just studying. So what I wanted to do day one was I wanted to be a player in the world market, knowing there was companies like Gibson, Martin. And anytime you mention guitars, people say, oh, I got a Martin, oh, I got a Gibson, I got this, I got that. And knowing that that would be a hard thing to do, and I had to do it a little differently. And I'd have to make it a little better. And if it didn't sound better, it had to look better. So I had to look at this as doing much better than they were production-wise. And first of all, what you got to do is learn how to do that. So that takes many, many years. And to say, oh, I'm going to take this unheard of brand versus this heard of brand. So that was probably took 10 or 15 years, and that would have been from the time I was 25 to 40, building guitars on my own. So I got to the point where I said, okay, how am I going to do this again and keep it rolling? So now it seems like people say, they've heard of my guitars, and people who have had those other brands, they're looking at as they're upgrading their guitars now to my guitars. So it has worked, and it's been great. But and part of the reason that it has is because the music is so much more complicated. So much people are playing all those things, and they're demanding more than what they would have had out of the '60s. In the '60s, you didn't have much good acoustic going on. As far as manufacturers, there was okay stuff. That stuff today isn't being played. Okay, the good guitars are still being played. Those were from the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Okay, so what we try to do is make the good stuff for the good people, so they get better, and make it all happen. So, what I try to do is put more labor in a guitar, not take the labor out. A lot of companies brag about how few hours or few man hours are in a guitar. It never hit well with me, and I know it doesn't hit well with a lot of guys here that actually make instruments too, but it's like, I can't even put a guitar in a case in 5 hours, but they can make, we're going to have it in and out of that case for 10 hours before it even goes in there. So it became our mission would be to say that we try to put more hours in a guitar than we try to take it out. So we average more man hours per guitar than anybody in the industry we know of. So most people wouldn't be proud of that, but we actually decided that we weren't that stupid, but we just kind of put more in it and try to give you a better guitar. So we finally accepted it after all these years. So